That's me. Much more polished with a spray tan and, a middle part. I think I spent more time on that picture than I did getting ready for prom. Oh, but the timer has started, so I'm going to go. So for those of you that did read my bio before, it's a list of the accolades of the things that we collect over time to appear that we're of worth, right? Like I published here, and I spoke there, and I graduated here, and I may or may not have been there. And what I would like to share with you are the majority of things that nobody has seen and stories that I, until recently, have not even shared with my closest friends. I hope you're all at the edge of your seats as you're looking at me, the white, blonde, cis woman who's like, what in the Reese Witherspoon book club is this woman going to talk about in February? So I hope that I can also be a little inclusive in my experience as well, but there's actually nothing wrong with her book club. So the theme is layers, and there are some pictures of an art journal that I had been working on since 2015. And I started this art journal when I met a woman named Sue. And Sue and I were on a board together. I was from a very small town. I was 29 or 30 at the time. And she served on a board with me. And to be very honest with you, I had no idea what it meant to serve on a board. But I saw these people that served on boards. I'm like, they seem pretty legit. And they're like, you should serve on a board. I'm like, I should. And so I meet her, and it's a community foundation. And she is a professional artist, a retired art educator. And when people start talking and you're like, they're so cool. And I just want to be around it. Am I cool? Will you accept me? And so I walked up to her after one of the board meetings, and I'm like, so I minored in art in undergrad. And she's like, that's amazing. What medium do you like? And I'm like, eh. I just did assignments, right? I did what people told me to do. And I tried to do them really, really well. But this idea of exploring and creativity was not something that I was familiar with. And so I said, maybe we could do art together sometime, right? That was my date, right? Invite, maybe we could art together. People talk about sport ball. And she, being 75, was like, what else does she have to do? She's like, yeah, sure. She's like, you seem pretty cool. And I'm like, okay. So I went to her studio, which if you know the place that I am from, her studio, having a studio in this town would be like having an underground tunnel to Paris, right? That's how big it felt when you're in a town of 18,000 people. And so I went, and what I loved about Sue was that we didn't art immediately. We sat down, and she had a couch with drop cloths over it, and she had ginger snaps that she took out of the freezer that she had made, right, and some tea. And I'm like, what is this woman doing? I am not here for therapy. I am here for art. And we sit down, and we talk for an hour or two. I was a professor with a very flexible schedule. And then I miss those days. No, and she said to me, she's like, okay, let's go create. And she had made a table for me. This woman didn't even know me, right? And she made this table, and every time I went to that table, there would be a quote or an article from the New York Times or a piece of inspiration or a painting. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? Is this the assignment for the day? Am I supposed to create something that's inspired? I'm like, what are the next 7 steps so I can art? And she said, Emily, you just play. And I'm like, I don't. And I looked over at her, and she's ripping papers, and she's painting, but she's not painting anything. I'm like, is this some abstract movement that I'm not familiar with? And what I came to realize is I didn't know how to play. And what I came to realize even more is that I didn't know how to just exist and be me. I was so used to the recipes of life. That's what gave me great comfort, is this is how you live, and this is how you move, and this is how you engage in the world, and then you're safe, and you're one of us, and you're not one of them. Eventually, as I started ripping things up and ripping up books, everybody audibly gasped, and then not burning them, though, not banning them, ripping up ones I loved. And I started putting these things together. I said, but what if I make a mistake? She gave me an art journal. She always gave me these books and these journals that she made. And she said, you can put things over it. It's layers, Emily. It's layers. And I don't think I'm going to cry today, but I just want you to know it's okay if I do. And I'm saying that more for myself than anything else. But the blank page was terrifying because at 29, 30 years old, though I had qualified for the Boston Marathon and PhD at Case Western Reserve, and I have a book deal and blah, 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 I didn't know how to exist with my own thoughts and my own feelings, and this was terrifying. Growing up, life was hard. And you're like, okay. And I know everybody has their own things, right? Oh, look at these cute notes that I thought I was going to look at. Okay. I'm just going to skip a few pages. There we go. I'm watching the time. And my sister here, my lovely father on the right, his name is Jim, Michelle, and then I was tried to be like, this isn't cool before it was cool to not think things are cool. You know, it was very hipster of me with my Taft School sweatshirt on. My sister's brain stopped developing at 18 months. And so if you think of the capacity of an 18-month-old, a lot of things are very hard for you as a family member, as a sister, as a mom and a dad, though I can't even imagine what that was like, though being a parent now, I'm starting to develop more layers of empathy and sympathy and grief for what they thought they would have and didn't. We ended up needing to place her in a home that could provide greater care for her because we got to the point where we would need to lock her in her room at night because we were afraid that she would leave. Because though her mental was not building, her physical strength was building. We'd have to put locks on the fridge because she would eat all the Kraft singles. We had all of these things that really circumscribed our life. It was around that time, a few years after the diagnosis, that my mother believed that she needed to go to law school. And so she moved in with her sister in Columbus, a few hours away, and it was the three of us. There are other things we can sprinkle in mental health issues and other exciting stories and tales that will make you realize that I'm not as Reese Witherspoon book club as you initially had put me into, that there are layers in anyone's story. But eventually, as my parents got divorced and found new people around the time that I was in middle school, high school, the only thing that I really wanted was to not stand out so much. In a community where you don't have divorces and you don't have anything outside of the nuclear June cleaver, despite the fact that nobody was happy in them, there was a clear prescription and recipe for the way in which you were supposed to live, and I just wanted to be a part of that. Eventually, at the age of 16, I met the individual who would become my husband 3 years later, 3 years later, 3 years later. Do the math. I was 16. 3 years later, good. I was looking for the open mouth, kind of like inaudible gasp. Yes, my frontal lobe had not developed yet, but when I met this individual's family, who I believed were of pure gold, the only thing I felt was comfort and love. Going into their home, it could rival any Danish family into the winter, right? Of the comforts, I'm talking like blankets on every couch, right? All of these things, and I just felt loved. His mother attended my volleyball games, right? She came to my art night. She was just there. And I'm like, whatever they found out, because mind you, this is pre-social, this is pre-online, this is and the town that I was in, even if there was social, we got to that about like 5 years later. In the timeline, when I worked at the university, one of my colleagues in the religion department said, you are in a very interesting space because you're not only teaching women's history, you're living it. Circa 1959. I didn't really know what he meant at the time. I digress. I do now. So I meet this family, and I'm like, what is it? Where's the recipe for it? And it was fundamentalism. These individuals who showered me with so much love and so much belonging were also individuals that had core values that I didn't even think about it. It wasn't, this is what they believe. Should I engage in that? Should I tango with that? It was, you have space for me? I'm there. These are the things I need to do, not black chocolate cake, though that is a great recipe. These are the things that I'm supposed to do. These are the things I'll do it. I'm supposed to bake pie. I'm supposed to learn how to make a homemade pie crust. I'll do it. You need me to do this? Oh, and we don't believe that these people are good? Well, I guess I've never met a gay person. Which I'm like, of course I'd met a gay person. But you don't talk about those things. You don't talk about the difference. You don't talk about the layers. All there really was in the place in which I grew up and the only world that I knew was us, the people who had gotten it right, the people who know how to measure the ingredients perfectly, the people who show up at church and is like, who isn't here? Is the first thought. Oh, well, that makes sense. Right, all of these check boxes, but man, that predictability was so comforting. I remember on my 21st birthday, I made a homemade meatloaf. I didn't go to my first bar until I was 27 because we didn't drink and we didn't dance and we didn't really do anything. But we did go to a lot of church. And I can go head to head with anyone on the Old Testament because for some reason that was a key component of life, memorizing that thing. And I did it. And as I was making meatloaf, I thought, I wonder what other people are doing on their 21st birthday. I went to a rather conservative evangelical undergrad, and so I was surrounded by those same people. And I just never really had any questions about whether this was right, whether there was another layer. I just knew that I was part of us, and I wasn't one of them. Which also meant that if I ever had something that would rise up as to who I was or what I believed, there wasn't really space for it if I wanted to stay in this place of feeling loved. That's not my meatloaf. Mine looks better. Okay. Enter graduate school. And I went to Case Western Reserve for my master's and my PhD, and in a very Tara Westover fashion, I would argue that art and education were my other worlds. My world was the world, and I knew nothing else. And when I would come up against it, i.e., my dissertation advisor, who was the only Black woman in the arts and sciences department in the entire university, and the only openly gay and queer woman, I had read her books, and the books that she had assigned questioned the majority of what I believed when I would stand or sit at the Sunday table after church. And my uncles or these other people in my life would give these one-liners about people that they had never met, that they had never known, that they had never interacted with. And I didn't speak up because kind, young Midwestern rural girls don't. They try and take up as little space as possible so that they can continue to be liked. I remember going to Dr. Rhonda Y. Williams' office one day, and I can only imagine the way that she must have perceived me initially. Here is this child of the corn who may have been scarier than the actual movie and hyper positive and hyper smiley, because that's what we do. And I led with apologizing. Thank you so much for giving me your time. I know that you're really busy, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going on, and just this like emotional apologetic vomit, right, that you do, that you kind of get lost in. And she looks at me square in the eye, and she says, Emily, everybody's time is valuable. I had never heard that. And I heard that from someone who for the last 7 years, others had been telling me that this person is them. It's not us. She was never late to my meetings. She answered every email within the day, and that doesn't seem like a big deal, but if you have been in graduate school, right? You know, and I'm trying not to be that person. I'm sorry, Brandy, you didn't get that slide deck till late last night. But in that way, she saw me, and she respected me. And with every interaction I had, I was able to develop more layers of myself and what I believed in ways that could no longer reconcile with who I was. It wasn't as though the people that were currently in my life were horrible human beings. Well, in some ways, their values were horrible. But themselves, those individuals in front of me that I could look square in the eye, I loved what that was. But eventually it became irreconcilable. You see, is that pretty artsy, right? Like, I'm trying pretty hard, team. I'm trying. But ultimately, I think one of the most transformative moments with my fellow member of the Reese Witherspoon Book Club, Meg Honey, who lives in Oakland, California, I attended my first bar when I received a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Humanities. They teach you so much. And I was basically Kimmy Schmidt Mole Woman. Like, I'm not kidding you. Like, when I say this, I am not kidding. If I'm lying, I'm dying. There are 25 professors from all around the United States. And here's Emily, like, rural conservative, hadn't really left the zip code. And we are on, it may have even been the Steel Magnolia. And we were on this experience where for 2 weeks we learned from civil rights veterans. And we started in Jackson, Mississippi, and we traveled through the deep south of the Mississippi Delta and ended in Memphis. And on that trip, we were able to meet the individual who stood beside Dr. King when he was assassinated. We were able to talk to women who put their lives on the line regularly to make sure that their voice and their vote was counted and heard. And we drive by Beale Street. And they're like, oh, Beale Street. And I'm like, what's Beale Street? And they're like, well, Beale Street is the place in which, it's like Bourbon Street in New Orleans. And I'm like, where there are a lot of bars and people drink. I'm like, oh, I've never been to a bar before. And like, I know I didn't sound like that, but I'm sure to them I sounded like that. And they're like, this is going to be fun. And the driver of that bus or trolley literally pulled over because they could hear what I said. And they're like, get out and go. It was the same weekend that B.B. King had passed. So when I tell you that my first experience, well, everyone's was memorable. Not enough Tylenol in the world. I say all that to say this. These things changed me, and I'm going to end with one more story. When I was in Memphis and when I was in Mississippi and all of those states, a few months beforehand, my aunt had passed away. I took her to the doctor in January, and 2 months later, she died of pancreatic cancer. And while she was one of us, it was maybe the purest form of love I had ever experienced. And I hadn't gotten over it, and I didn't know how to hide it and how to tuck it in. And so when I was on this trip that exposed me to so many things and was at Rhodes College, which is the pixelated image in the back, a group of people had went out to hear a speaker because apparently that's what you do to learn and grow and love. And I stayed back because I couldn't interact with the world. And I was sitting on a picnic table and crying, probably under a large oak tree. That's how I remember it. Are there oaks in Tennessee? I don't know. And David, this man who was a fellow with me, came and sat down on the picnic bench. And he listened. And I told him everything about my aunt. I told him the fish dinners that we would make together. I told him, everything that if you had like a bingo card, a fundamentalist, you're like, ooh, this girl has got a bingo in every square. Like, we like to make fish dinners together. And she taught me how to make bread before foot washing of communion. Like, I'm telling him everything. I'm giving him all of the layers in ways that I had never done before. And all he said is, what can I do for you in this moment? How can I continue to be here for you? And I'm like, you're doing it. And he didn't do anything, right? He just sat with me. the next day, we're in the back of the bus and we're going somewhere and we know it's 3 or 4 hours. So we're like really leaning in to just somebody else tell me a story. And eventually people were in their own conversations on the bus. And I talked to David and David says, I said, what are you thinking? Because I like asking that question. And he said, I was thinking about my ex-wife. I said, oh, what about her? And he's talking about his 3 children and all this. He goes, I'm just thinking about the day that she said, after 25 years of marriage, it's okay if you go. I know you're gay. And juxtaposing my experience with him the night before with my experience on the back of that bus, I knew for a fact that if there is a divine being, that there's absolutely no way that David or anyone that David represents is one of them. And I was forever changed by the fact that whether it's Sue or Rhonda Williams or David Colton, all individuals who, if they were to look at one layer of me, would immediately assume that I was probably not worth their time, that I was maybe a little too basic Reese, and that they should spend time with individuals that are more like themselves. And it radically changed me. It wasn't immediate. I didn't pack my bags as soon as I got home, but I was in this rather unsettled experience where I did not know how to coexist and how to tuck things in so I could continue to have the love of us while acknowledging the humanity of them. Because it's not a binary. There is no binary. I've become the most confident in the last few years by simply owning the fact that there are very few things that I do know. And what I do know is that everyone has a voice and an experience, and everyone has hundreds and hundreds of layers. And sometimes they rip up those pieces of paper and create something really beautiful out of it. For a certain amount of time, I thought that being in this new world of books and knowledge and care and love and interesting conversations with creative people, I could no longer even acknowledge the other world in fear of the way in which you may perceive me. And I could no longer be here and have this other world include me either. So when I left, I lost everyone. I lost everyone. That's not true. I lost the majority. You can look at this later if you'd like. I know that I'm running out of time, but Karen, I see you. You're being very kind. And so what I would like to say to you in this final charge, it was around the time of Me Too. And I was walking home from a Clippers game with my now partner and one of his friends. And he had imbibed some Clippers beverages and felt a little bit looser to maybe ask questions from the women's historian and the women's studies guru. And he said, so this Me Too thing, right? It's a little overblown. And it took everything I had to. And then I thought of David Colton, and we got back to our home, and we were sitting around the fire pit, and I said, I'm going to share 2 quick stories with you. And to your question, and this is my response. And he said, why are you still working there? And I am so sorry that this happened to you. So the layering is not simply a moment where you stop and you come to clarity and you move forward, but the layers are you sharing with others as well, so that they cannot see you as one of them and everyone is one of us. Thank you so much.